Hello friends, and welcome back to the garden. Today I'm going to do an introduction on the 7 layers of a food forest. You know, I'm looking at Facebook and I'm seeing a lot of groups describing themselves as food forest groups. But when I go into their content and see what everybody's posting and commenting about, they're using the wrong terminology. This is not food forest gardening that they're talking about. In most cases, everybody's talking about growing annual vegetables. You know, like these radishes and cabbage, and this is some kale, collard, mustard greens, arugula. These are annual vegetable crops. It's not part of a food forest. Let me go back in time to the beginning, the first time that the term food forest was used. That was an English gentleman. I believe his name was Robert Hart. He coined the term food forest back in the 1960s, and that was for a temperate forest garden that he planted in England. Up until that time, forest gardens were known in the tropics, and he's sort of credited as being the first person to attempt to do the same thing, which is a designed ecosystem. You know, having trees. I mean, that's the first part of the definition of any forest, is if it has to have trees to be a forest, at least. But you know, orchards with trees are not forests either, really. But anyway, he termed the coin food forest for an ecosystem that's, you know, self-maintaining, self-fertilizing, controls moisture, recycles nutrients, and so forth and so on. We're going to get into a lot more detail about this in subsequent videos. And then even when the Australians, Bill Mollison, came along in the 70s and coined the term permaculture, he was talking about the same kind of garden. He called it a forest garden, but he's talking about exactly the same type of garden, a natural garden with 7 layers, as Robert Hart was talking about in the 60s. And other authors since then, Dave Jack and Eric Tonsmeyer, did a wonderful 2-volume detailed book on forest gardening, and they use that term there, forest gardening. That's the name of the book. I believe it's called Edible Forest Gardening is the name of that book. Anyway, yeah, they were talking about the same kind of forest as Robert Hart when he called it food forest. Well, the term food forest is what actually caught on, and everybody's using that term now, but unfortunately the term is losing its meaning because too many people are using it to describe just plain old gardening, vegetable gardening, raised bed gardening, in the ground gardening, generally annual vegetable gardening. Food forests are trees and other perennial plants, not annual plants. So, you know, in case there's any doubt by now, if you've seen any of my other videos, this channel is about actual forest ecosystems. It's not about annual gardening. I might throw a little subject, you know, a little thing or two about annual gardening in there once in a while, just because I happen to do some annual gardening along with my food forest gardening. But this channel is primarily going to be about the ecological aspects of food forest gardening, or you could call it edible forest gardening. So one way to define a food forest is that it has 7 layers. I think you could get by without one of those layers, that being the vines, and still call it a food forest if you have all the other 6 layers. But you need at least those 6, and preferably all 7, including the vines. So what I want to do next on my subsequent videos is describe each of the 7 layers and explain their ecological function and how they make the gardening self-maintaining, self-fertilizing. In this video, I'll just list them real quick. We actually Well, I guess we barely have all 7 of them here. But this is a new garden that I just planted this year, so some of them aren't really in place well yet. But at least we do have the canopy layer. That's the highest layer. That would be these big oak trees. Very important. This is the layer that captures the most sun and pumps the most sugar into the ground. Very, very important. The next layer after that would be the understory. I've planted a whole lot of fruit trees and nut trees. They're eventually going to grow up tall enough to call them the understory. Right now they're too small to really say they occupy that space. They're more the size of a shrub at this point. But that's the next layer, the shrubs. And within the shrubs you can have tall shrubs and lower, shorter shrubs. And then below the shrubs, I think everybody knows what a shrub is. This little cherry of the Rio Grande. It's about the size of a shrub. It'll grow up into an understory tree eventually. I guess the only trees I have that are tall enough to call the understory are probably my bananas. And I'm not even sure how permanent they are here because we just may be too cold, too frosty here for bananas. Time will tell. Anyway, getting back, the next layer below the shrub layer is called the herb layer. So that would be probably stuff like this, these cannas, and that's Okinawa spinach and longevity spinach. Plants like that would be occupying the herb layer. And then let's see, we got some ground cover. In fact, let's go back to where we just were. There's some nice ground cover in this area. This is native Florida frog fruit, all of this. That's a nice ground cover. You want to cover all bare ground with something, either mulch or living ground cover. So that's what, 5 layers I think so far. The other 2 layers are going to be the underground layer, and I don't even think Robert Hart or even Jackie, I'm not sure how you pronounce Dave's last name. I'm not sure those guys even knew yet how important the underground layer was because of the emergence of the understanding of the mycorrhizal fungi. But it's a very, very important layer. But what they had in mind, they were talking about just things like sweet potatoes, cassava, roots and root crops living underground. And then finally, the last layer is the vine layer. I'm gonna look up into this tree. There's native muscadine grape covering that. These are my neighbor's trees. But vines, and we have other vines, Virginia creeper, earleaf greenbrier, maypop passion fruit, coral honeysuckle. There's lots of vines. Anyway, these are the 7 layers. So I think I'm going to start with the top layer, the canopy layer, on my next video, and drill down a little bit into that layer and its importance and why it sets the tone for everything else in your garden. And then we'll go through each layer one at a time with one video for each layer. So that's the plan there. Many of you food forest gardeners are already pretty well versed in this stuff, but it seems like there's a lot of beginning gardeners, or there's just, I just hate to see the term food forest thrown around so haphazardly like I'm seeing it, where it's beginning to lose its meaning because people are using that term, or they're belonging to groups that call themselves food forests, even though they're using chemical fertilizers, they're using pesticides, they're doing a lot of tilling of the ground. These are all no-nos in food forest gardening, as described by the people who started the whole movement, Robert Hart and Bill Mollison and all the other names I've mentioned, and there's others as well. By the way, for you beginners, a really good introduction to the subject of food forest gardening is a book called Gaia's Garden by Toby Hemingway. Excellent overview, brief, easy to read. Get that book and read it. I think that'll give you a big jump up in your understanding of what food forest gardening is and isn't. So I guess I'll just leave it with that. Just a little update on where we're going next with our video series. We sure appreciate, as of today, we're up to 20 subscribers. I was happy to see that. I hope y'all were enjoying this, and please send comments to me. I'd like to know what you're interested in and what sort of subjects to cover. So for now though, the next 7 should be the 7 layers of a food forest. All right, y'all, take care and happy gardening.